Welcome, everyone, to the Friday, April 4th, 2025 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, we'll talk about some legislative forums in eastern Iowa, and of course, we dive deep into the second legislative funnel at the Iowa Capitol. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin.murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week are Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Erin.
Also surviving the second funnel is lead Des Moines Bureau Chief Maya Marchel Hoff. Hello, Maya.
Happy Friday, Erin.
Happy Friday to all who celebrate. Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is with us. Hello, Sarah.
Greetings, Erin.
And Gazette columnist Todd Dorman is here. Happy Liberation Day, Todd.
Thank you. Same to you. And don't forget to tell the listeners and watchers about the tariff that we've placed on this podcast. It's 20%, I think is what it is, maybe 34.
That's right. And the best thing about it is it's going to be really hard for anybody to place a reciprocal tariff on it. So we really got you folks over a barrel. So
yeah. We're valuable. I mean, people are going to be willing to pay a duty to import us.
Our producer Bailey.cichon has noted the math here that 20% of zero is still zero.
Well, Bailey, let's not get
into the numbers and the math. Let's not get bogged down with that kind of stuff. All right. So before we get to the Golden Dome and the second funnel, let's ease our way in with a stop in eastern Iowa first, where our very own Sarah Watson covered a couple of legislative forums that featured some interesting discussions. Sarah, one of the forums, I understand, right, DEI bills took center stage. And at another one, it seemed like the main topic was property tax legislation. Tell us a little bit more about those.
Yeah, so the first one you mentioned, it was a civil rights forum hosted by some area groups such as the NAACP and the Progressive Action for the Common Good, I believe is what it's called. Democrats were the ones who came to those. And so they talked a lot about the recent diversity, equity, inclusion bills that have been going through hearings. And if you read Tom Barton's reporting, there's still some disagreement on among Republicans on how far to curtail those diversity, equity, inclusion programs and whether to apply those to private universities. It was kind of a forum to organize Democrats and people who are opposed to those types of efforts. And in particular, an Ames lawmaker, Ross Wilburn, who's a Democrat from Ames and a member of the Black Caucus. And he really kind of sounded the alarm for the Democrats in the room. He said that several years ago, they were predicting that the legislature would go after gender identity in the Civil Rights Code. And so he's saying now that there are a handful of lawmakers that he's heard or talked to that oppose any kind of protections under the Civil Rights Code, and that but he does think that sexual orientation is next. So that was really, like I said, just kind of an organizing meeting for local Democrats to sound alarm and criticize some of these bills that are coming through the legislature. And so then the other forum was a bipartisan forum, and really that was hosted by the Chamber of Commerce, and the focus of that one was a lot about taxes and tax incentives. And so one bill in particular, the bill that would cut economic development funding for the 4 largest counties. Scott County's off of that bill, wherever it ends up going. It sounds like Representative Gary Moore went into the leadership office, he said, and told them, hey, Scott County doesn't get very much funding. We're a border county, so we compete with Illinois. It doesn't make sense for Scott County to be on this bill. And so he said, it sounds like the leadership said, okay, Scott County's off, but he wasn't sure exactly where the rest of the bill was going to go. And then just property taxes was, another topic that lawmakers said they were moving slowly on. And it was kind of a shift in tone from previous forums that I've covered, where the lawmakers, at least from Scott County, were really, we want to get property tax legislation passed this session, and now they're kind of shifting to a different tone of, it might not be this session, it might be next session. We're gonna, take our time with it.
Yeah. To go back real quick to the 4-county economic development bill that you were talking about, it sounds like that one does not have a legislative future. It did not survive the funnel, and we heard from folks. I can't even remember which. Is it a House bill or a Senate bill?
I believe it's a House bill.
Okay, and so all I could remember is the opposite chamber said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that one. So that one was definitely an interesting talker for a little bit, but it doesn't sound like it happened. But so it's also interesting to me. I hadn't heard Representative Moore talk about that, because Scott County is not one of the 4, right?
It
was
is.
on
It's
the bill.
among
It was
was.
one of the.
It was okay.
Yeah, it's one of the 4. But it received. If I have to go back and look at the numbers, it was less than $1 million in 2024, and other communities were getting like tens of millions of dollars. Like the top receiver was, I believe,
I think it was Boone, wasn't it?
Boone. Yeah, yeah, it was Boone.
No
Yeah,
kidding.
seriously, because they're building. There's some plant going in. I forget.
Oh, okay. I thought that was
the Daisy Dairy facility.
Yeah, that's
okay.
it.
Okay. So there you go. Not even one of the counties that wouldn't have even been covered by the bill, anyways. Yeah. And then and to also put a bow on property tax there, which is the other one you mentioned. To the point, we're hearing, we've been told that bill is going to undergo some changes, anyways, and get another round of hearings, maybe this week, maybe the week after, but coming soon here, and so that's already getting a facelift, and we'll see how much that changes. And we also, to what you said there, Sarah, we heard that same thing from multiple Republican leaders this week, that maybe it gets done this year. They'd like to, but maybe not. Like, there's no guarantee that it does. And we kind of heard the message that we want to do something, but we also want to make sure we do it right. And so if it gets to a point where they don't feel like they have the right bill in late April, they won't necessarily forge ahead with something just for the sake of passing a bill. All right, good stuff. Let's dive into it now. Let's get to the Iowa Capitol. Perfect lead in there, because some of those topics we heard about this week, and then obviously a lot more as we hit the second legislative funnel deadline. It's a point in the session where most policy bills were required to have support from both chambers of the Iowa legislature. To be more specific here, to remain eligible for consideration down the home stretch of the session, bills by the end of this week, and we're recording here on Friday, had to be passed by one full chamber and then out of committee in the opposite chamber. So in other words, House passed bills had to be passed out of a Senate committee and vice versa, with the normal caveats that doesn't apply to budget and tax bills, and that there's all kinds of tricks that legislators have to resurrect bills that didn't survive. The second funnel week certainly stood in stark contrast to the first. You may remember us talking about the first funnel week about a month ago, and how absolutely nuts it was, how many subcommittee and committee meetings they held to flood bills across that first finish line. This second funnel week was nothing like that. I mean, look, it was plenty busy, but nothing like that first one, and exponentially quieter deadline week, and there was barely anything at all going on at the Capitol yesterday, Thursday, which historically is very rare for a funnel week, Thursday. Tom, what was your sense of why this second funnel week was not as intense as that first week was?
Well, we already talked about just the large volume of bills that have been filed this session, and a lot of those coming from the Iowa House. And the House has been busy for this session. I mean, they've done essentially their side of things. Their argument is, look, we've done our part. We've staked out our policy priorities, and we've done the work of getting a lot of their bills passed. They did a lot of floor debate the last couple of weeks, and have passed a lot of stuff over to the Senate. And now the Senate has, for various reasons, I guess, decided to, be a little bit more deliberate in their work and have been more selective in deciding which bills to work on and to bring forward, and which of the House bills they want to push forward. And, again, as Sarah Watson mentioned, had a story in today's paper kind of looking at some of the divides on key issues between House and Senate Republican leadership when it pertains to DEI bills, but also when you're looking at bills and priorities passed over from the House to the Senate about restricting eminent domain and CO2 pipelines in the state. There's also some disagreement over the pesticide shield bill, the bill that would restrict lawsuits that can be filed against pesticide companies regarding warning labels on products that have been linked to serious health conditions or concerns, including cancer. The Senate passed that bill, but the House, for a second year in a row, hit the brakes. We were told by House Speaker Pat Grassley yesterday that effectively that bill is dead in the House, that there just is not the votes or the support there from House Republicans to move that forward this year. Again, you've got some disagreements between the House and the Senate over what the priorities should be, how they should approach certain issues. And again, the House has felt like, it's done its work this legislative session. They've passed a lot of bills over to the Senate. And then this week, we saw the Senate take kind of a more, I don't know, this probably isn't the best word to use, but maybe leisurely approach to what the Senate has taken during this
deliberative
session.
Is
deliberative.
There
we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that, a couple weeks ago, we had a reporters roundtable discussion on Iowa Press, and we were talking about, this was just before the funnel, but at that point we were talking about exactly what you were just talking about. Tom and Stephen Gruber Miller of the Des Moines Register made the comment that just simply observing, like you just did, that the House, I think his exact words were something effective: the Senate doesn't like to pass as many bills as the House does. And to illustrate how the different chambers feel about this, kind of from a philosophical point of view, that clip was turned into a little GIF, and Senate Republicans were sharing it with each other as a badge of honor. Stephen talking about the fact that the Senate was passing far fewer bills than the House. So just kind of illustrates the point Tom was making.
Yeah. And yeah, to that, I've heard from plenty of Senate Republican lawmakers who have essentially said different variations of the less the legislature does, the better. It's essentially the less we add on on regulations, and the less we add to the code. The less complexity that we add, the better.
Sorry, Tom, I was just going to say too that before they were in the trifecta, that was the thing I heard a lot of from state House Republicans is, hey, we shouldn't be coming in here and adding laws. We should be coming here and repealing laws and making the code smaller, not bigger. I don't think that's worked out that way once they had the full control of the levers. But yeah, so that's an old fashioned sentiment that's suddenly coming back up. Maya, as we and Tom listed a few there, as we kind of process what didn't survive this second funnel, is there anything that didn't get across the finish line that maybe surprised you?
I don't think there's anything that necessarily surprised me. Maybe I was just there was a lot of talk and discussion around them when they came up near the beginning of the session that I just assumed that they had already advanced. But there was one, it was requiring citizenship status on driver's licenses. In the House, that was legislation that was proposed, or it passed out of subcommittee in, I believe, February, but it just when reporters were talking to Republican Representative Steve Holt, who chairs the House Judiciary Committee. He just said it's not going to be going anywhere this session. That I had forgotten about that legislation until one of the reporters brought it up, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. I thought that might have had a clearer path.
It sounds like they decided to drop that bill in favor of advancing the Secretary of State's election bills and providing different ways and mechanisms for the Secretary of State's office to check the citizenship status of individuals who register to vote, and felt that was a better, I guess, vehicle to use to kind of address the issue that they're trying to address with that driver's license bill.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what Holt said too. Another thing that I didn't realize that wouldn't be advancing until yesterday was a bill that was passed by the House and came out of the new House Higher Ed Committee was one that would basically require the Board of Regents at state public universities to not require students to enroll in diversity, equity, inclusion, and critical race theory related courses. That just wasn't picked up in the House. I don't know if it was a language thing or something like that. A lot of the other DEI related bills did get through on the Senate side this week, and especially yesterday, including one that would prohibit state entities and local governments, as well as community colleges, from funding or establishing DEI offices or hiring or paying DEI officers. So that was interesting. Although one part of that bill that was passed by the House that was struck was a section that would prohibit private universities and colleges in the state that participate in the Iowa tuition grant program from also funding or establishing DEI offices. I thought that was interesting that they decided to take that out.
That was going to be one of the interesting ones from the start, because you had that kind of differences in philosophies over, because that very clearly Republicans feel strongly about eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but there was a clear split in philosophy over whether that should be extended to the private universities versus the public universities, and to Maya's point, we saw that ultimately play out this week. Todd, let me bring you in here from a big picture view, and we've kind of been alluding to this around the edges here. We've seen a growing divergence of legislative priorities among House and Senate Republicans in recent years. Some of these things we're talking about seem to be another example of that, and maybe even a growing divide there. I don't know. What's your view?
Well, I think Growing Divergence was a band I used to see in college, and so thanks for the memories. Well, politics kind of runs on friction. You've got friction between lawmakers and policies and parties, but when you control everything, the only entity left to fight with is within your own party, and so inevitably that happens. They'll disagree,
especially when you're in year 9, right? And
right.
Kind of done all the easy, obvious things that you've been wanting to do.
Well, yeah, at this point, it's like if there are big problems in Iowa, you guys have been in charge for a while. Shouldn't you have addressed this at some other point? But yeah, I mean, I think it's natural for that to happen. And it's been several years that it's clear that the Senate and House have different philosophies on what they want to achieve, and that's caused some problems. And I think, the session's gone over a couple of times because they couldn't agree on some bill or another, tax cuts or whatever they decide. But yeah, I think that's inevitable. And it's, maybe that's good because they're kind of a check on each other right now, which is maybe some of the crazier stuff hasn't gotten through. But I mean, a lot of bad stuff has, don't get me wrong. It's not I wouldn't give them an A+, but yeah. One question I had, what happened to the library bill? The one where they were gonna, it's dead. Okay.
Yep. Those did not pass this second funnel. Very quite like they're nothing on them post first funnel. Weren't even passed out of one chamber, right? Like it wasn't even that one passed and it stopped in the other. They didn't even get out of a full chamber vote.
I was just going to say, in the House, they passed out of committee and were put on the calendar, but never made it to the House floor. The House never passed those over to the Senate, and in the Senate, it cleared subcommittee. I can't remember if it cleared committee there.
Yeah, that's been too long. I can't remember either without looking it up.
But anyway, to Erin's point, there was never. It was interesting. There was never enough support for it to pass either chamber.
That's unfortunate that the children of Iowa are going to be less safe now in the library. I mean, it breaks my heart. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see which DEI bills survive. It sounds like maybe the one pertaining to private universities may be the one that they have disagreements on.
Yeah, that's the one that Maya mentioned, that the House passed it, that where you couldn't use the Iowa tuition grant fund to attend a private college that has diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. The Senate advanced the bill, but took that piece out of it.
So yeah, this is a new segment of the program called "Hey, tell Todd what's going on."
That's all right. Hey, look, if Todd Dorman has a question about a bill, there's a lot of other people who probably do too. So
I've got a list of bills here. Let me go down the line.
Yeah, my sense is that House Republicans still want to see a broader DEI ban and may try and negotiate with the Senate over that. I think what may end up happening is, since the Senate amended it, it'll come back to the House. At this point, I think maybe the House will go ahead and pass the amended Senate version so they can still get the DEI restrictions extended to state entities, local governments, and the community colleges, and then, come back later in the session and maybe try and incorporate the restriction on Iowa tuition grant funds, being used for private colleges as part of a budget bill or some other bill. My sense is that they'll tack that on, maybe as an amendment or as or incorporate that somehow into a budget bill later in the session and try and have, ongoing negotiations over that with the Senate.
That issue is, it would be difficult for me if I was a lawmaker, because you're punishing, say, Drake University. You're not letting them have tuition grant funds, but you're actually also punishing individual students who want to go, maybe lower income, want to go to Drake or another private school, but they're not towing the line, so you can't get financial aid. So that's it seems like a little much, but
yeah. Well, and the one interesting argument I heard from a Senate Republican, I believe it might have been Rosenboom, but
it was Ken
remember.
Rosenboom
who made, and was it him who made the point, the slippery slope argument that
yes.
that his concern about it is, if we do this now, what's the next legislature what string are they going to attach to the Iowa tuition grant, and then what's the legislature after that going to attach to the Iowa tuition grant? So to Tom's point there, and let me ask you, Todd, that's the other big question here, is all of this stuff, how much of them become bargaining chips, and what policies did the two chambers decide to dig their heels on as they look to shut down the session here? To Tom's point, does this come back on the education appropriations bill from the House? Todd, basically what I'm asking you is, how worried should I be about session shutdown this year, and how smoothly that's going to go?
There's a lot of stuff out there that
that's what I'm worried about.
Could be stuck on the standings bill at the end of the session. They've done that before. I don't get a sense that they have any compunction about doing it.
Did the Twins game go final, Todd? Was that the alert there that
no, I'm sure it was ESPN telling me something really important about the NFL draft or something. It's going to be they're going to do that. And, hopefully they won't resurrect some of the more extreme stuff, but shutdown is funny. People want to go. They don't want to hang out. They don't want to fight anymore. They're just going to vote for whatever they vote for and go home. So, and that's, too bad for the people of Iowa, but, it's time to get back, and corn doesn't grow in the bag, as Stu Iverson used to say this time of year. So
Love it. Love it.
The DEI bill related to like local government. Locally, there was some concern because public health departments in particular do like translation services for public health messaging, or like if there's, a high proportion of Black women with breast cancer, that would be like a certain population that they would target with extra messaging of like, get extra mammograms or exams and testing done if a certain population was experiencing, different health outcomes. Or another example is like rural testing clinics, things like that. Was there any concern expressed about that local government provision in the DEI bill? Because that's just something we heard about here a little bit.
Yes, that was brought up during debate on the House floor by Davenport Democratic Representative Ken Crokin. He mentioned the concerns that were expressed to him by, I believe, the Scott County Health Department. And he mentioned that on the floor. The floor manager for the bill, who his name is escaping me. I can't remember who the floor manager was, but anyway, my recollection was that they downplayed those concerns and said that, in their view, the bill would not affect that or impact that it was more targeted toward prohibiting cities, counties, school districts, other local governments from, again, funding diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and officers, having dedicated departments or DEI officers whose duties and responsibilities specifically are, related to diversity, the hiring, et cetera, recruitment, retention efforts, and that services like the ones you described provided by the public health department would not fall under that. That, providing health services to different populations, providing translation services, things of that nature, that those would not be impacted, that it would not impact the ability of governments to continue to, again, provide services to, different groups and populations.
And that's a good point, because that also gets to, and this applies to so many bills, the whole argument and debate that you'll hear fairly regularly about, okay, you can say that's your intent in the bill, but what matters is the language, and all it takes is, the right lawsuit, the right lawyer, the right legal argument, and then the right judge to interpret it differently. So that's why you hear concerns like that, and it's also why you will sometimes hear, and I don't think Crokin, you correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, I don't think he approached it specifically in this way, but it's why you will occasionally hear, the minority party, Democrats in this case, Forever in Iowa, get up and say, and ask them specifically, is this your intention for this bill to cover this or mean this? And that's essentially what they're doing there. Sometimes is establishing that for future legal reasons. So if a judge ever does have to come back and try to judge the intent of a legislation, they can point to the majority party's testimony saying, no, we do not intend for our bill to do that. So that's another example of that. Real quick, before we go, I wanted to talk about two things that weren't really related to the funnel, because one is about taxes and the other is a bill that had already survived the funnel and is now actually passed into law. Tom, what can drivers in Iowa no longer do starting July 1st?
So starting July 1st, drivers can no longer handle a cell phone while they are driving. It would have to be, you could only use a cell phone while you're driving if you're using hands-free or voice-activated mode. Currently, Iowa has a texting while driving ban. The bill that was signed into law by Governor Kim Reynolds on Wednesday means to strengthen that, to add on to that, to say that it's not just texting. You can't have the phone in your hand while driving, period. Currently, in the law, there's an exemption if you're taking a call or if you're using your phone for GPS navigation, And, for years, I mean, essentially ever since that texting while driving ban was passed back in 2017, Iowa law enforcement and traffic safety advocates and families whose loved ones have been killed by distracted drivers have been arguing to strengthen that law, because they say right now it's currently incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to enforce, because people can say, well, I wasn't texting, I was making a call, taking a call, or using it for my GPS navigation, which again are all exceptions or exemptions currently allowed under the law. So this would kind of in effect close that loophole and say, look, you can't have a phone in your hand while you're driving. If you have it in your hand, that now is gonna lead to a fine and can appear in your driving record.
Yep. So you've got 3 months. Hopefully, have CarPlay. If you don't, get to know your Hey Siri, Hey Google function. My phone just woke up when I said that.
So if you have one of those like doohickeys that like you put on your car dash, and like so you put your phone like up on your kind of dash, is that?
You would have to do like kind of the one push function. You have it in the dock or whatever, right? So it's not in your hand, and as long as you can kind of do the one push function or the voice activated function, then that's fine. That's allowed. So voice activator hands-free mode does not include accessing non-navigational video content, participating in a video call, streaming video, accessing gaming data, or reading electronic message or notification. The bill does provide exceptions when the vehicle is completely stopped, either off the roadway or as far from the center as possible if it can't be moved. And then there are also exceptions for first responders while on duty, healthcare professionals in the course of emergency situations. Holding, viewing, or manipulating an electronic device while driving is prohibited. You can't
watch C-SPAN on the highway.
Right.
Yeah. There you go, Tom. I just found the language, and that's what you're saying. That allows a person to use verbal commands or a single touch to activate or deactivate the device. So if you can do something with a quick tap, it's okay. But otherwise, you gotta Hey Siri.
Right.
Can't record the On Iowa Politics podcast on the road anymore.
We encourage you to pull over to find a good restaurant, plug the headphones on, and enjoy yourself fully immersed in the On Iowa Politics podcast experience. One more quick one before we go. Maya, Democrats have joined the party on taxes on tips.
Yeah. That was, I guess, not unexpected because, we saw bipartisan support around not putting taxes on cash tips around the presidential election. Both President Donald Trump and former Vice President Kamala Harris, and also presidential candidate, both were very in support of lifting taxes on tips, especially when visiting the battleground state of Nevada, which has a large concentration of tip workers. But yeah, this is something that both parties love, and nonpartisan economists are pretty iffy on. On Monday, Democrats held a press conference in downtown Des Moines, kind of highlighting bills that they introduced probably back in February around lifting the income tax off of tips, and also not taxing overtime pay for workers. So interesting. They highlighted that. On the other end, Republicans have similar bills in the House that are identical. The wording is exactly the same. So both parties are pushing for the same thing, and yet they're not. Either of them are saying, join us in our route, which is, I talked to Republican sponsors of the bills, both David Young and Representative Mike Sexton, and they're both like, Democrats are welcome to come and join us and join us in voting and supporting this legislation. But I thought it was really interesting, just kind of that back and forth there. The reason why economists are a little bit iffy on this is because of the impact of the federal budget and just the overall economy. So currently, the federal minimum wage is the same in Iowa. It's $7.25 an hour, but for tipped workers who make more than $30 a month in tips, the minimum wage is $4.35. So that's interesting. But according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, lifting the federal tax on cash tips would reduce federal revenues by $150 to $250 billion over the next decade, depending on kind of how it's tackled. And also, economists, nonpartisan critics of this have also kind of said it would only go so far because there's a certain threshold that in tips you make that would have to be hit in order to see no taxes on the tips. And so there's question about how effective it would be. But both parties are arguing that this is a good move for working class Iowans and supporting them and taking a little bit of a burden off of them. So it was just interesting to see them agree on something and yet not come together, which I guess isn't surprising, but.
Yeah, no, and it's also for all the reasons you laid out. It's interesting. It's one of those that sounds good and makes a great line on a political stump speech, and then when you kind of pull the layers back on it, and that might be why leaders haven't moved those bills, despite both Democrats and Republicans being in support of them. But I mean, Todd, wouldn't you love to not have to be taxed on all those tips that you get for people who tip you for your work on your columns?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm taxed on, like, if someone has a tip like you need to move to another state because we don't want you here. I mean, that's a tip,
but you don't know if it's taxed.
Well, one guy said he would pay the expenses, so I guess that would be.
There you go. That
would be a tip. But yeah, I've got a jar out, but no one comes around to give me any tips. So yeah.
Are we back to Bailey's point that 20% of zero is zero?
Yes.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. And you can also find the podcast each week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. And now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you also subscribe to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox, you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. Lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Maya Marchel, Hoff, Sarah Watson, Todd Dorman, and our producer Bailey.cichon, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.